Hi, good evening everyone. Welcome TM. Hi Rekha. Hi Kirti. TM, just give me a moment. I'm just going to introduce the book and then ask you to join. I'll send you a request. You just need to accept it. Hey Maithili. Okay. Hey Lango. Hi Neeta. So good evening and good morning to those who've logged in from other parts of the world. Welcome to The Constant Gardener, where we will be in conversation with T M Krishna in the backdrop of his book, The Spirit of Inquiry, Notes of Dissent, Selected Writings of T M Krishna. For those who don't know, this book, the latest from Penguin, is a compilation of Krishna's key writings that reflects the critical, as the book says, the critical and cultural engagement of one of our finest thinkers, public intellectuals, and practitioners of art. Before I invite T M Krishna to kickstart a conversation with us, I want to introduce, the last 4 days I have literally immersed myself and been reading this book, which is just beyond brilliant. And there are so many beautiful words, phrases, sentences that really mark and make this book so rich, interesting, and immersive. I also realized that I've read many of his pieces when they were published individually in specific publications, but really when they come together, the book is almost, for me, and this is a metaphor that I thought of, it was almost like a museum of articles that are almost like works of art, artifacts, curated with care and consciousness into specific rooms that have a distinct narrative, in a way that walking through them is like appreciating each piece for its individual beauty and perspective, of course, but also attempting to sort of step back and look at the room in its entirety. The book's immersive quality also stems from the fact that the entire museum is constructed and curated by this one voice. So, in a sense, there aren't any distractions. For instance, in a newspaper or a magazine, they'd perhaps be sharing space with not only other pieces of writing, but also very varied subjects that, in a sense, takes away for us from the possibility of being able to meditate on them in a way that we engage with a book, for instance. There are so many beautiful phrases, like I said, that really forced me to sort of pause and think about those words. But I will start, before I invite TM, is with TM quotes someone in an essay, in his essay called Counterpoint, which was published in 2021 as a response to his own essay published in The Hindu in 2015. So it is, in a sense, a response to his own self. In that, T M Krishna quotes Richard Feynman, and he says, "You are under no obligation to remain the same person you were a year ago, a month ago, or even a day ago. You are here to create yourself continuously." And that, as they say, makes all the difference. So, TM, here I am sending you an invitation, and then we can start.
Hey.
Hello, welcome.
Hi, can you hear me?
Very well.
Good. How are you doing?
How are you doing?
All fine, all good. So far, so good.
Great. Thank you so much, TM, for accepting our invitation and, agreeing spontaneously to be in conversation with us.
Pleasure, Akhil, always talk to you.
Thank you. So, Krishna, without much ado, I'm going to, I have a bunch of questions that I want to ask you, but specifically to the book, because I just literally finished the book this evening at 6:30, so I'm really so full of the book. So I want to make the most of, the book is still fresh in my mind. So I'm going to start off firstly by, I did a random, what exactly is inquiry and inquiry? And I realized that inquiry is the noun for inquiry. And in a sense, the definition is, an act of asking for information. And in a sense, Krishna, in your introduction, you write about how your tryst with writing, in a sense, began way back in 1999, where in a column in The Hindu, there was an author who compared the musicians of yesteryears with musicians of the 90s. And he spoke about how musicians of yesteryears had a sense of humility, and those in the 90s were inaccessible, snooty, and you say lived a life of luxury. You decided to write a rebuttal to that piece, and by that act of refusing and to sort of speaking up, your tryst with writing, in a sense, began.
Yeah.
So, inquiry has sort of been the starting point, so to speak, of your entire writing journey. Am I right in saying that?
Well, absolutely true. I mean, I remember that piece very, very vividly. Annoyed me to no end. Uh, and yeah, so I think inquiry, it's used often synonymously. But I think there is a nuance and there's a little difference between the two. But keeping that aside, yeah, I think asking questions has been something that's been part of my growing up to a large extent. So whatever it is, whether it was at home or school, so asking questions, trying to find out more, trying to understand something better. I mean, actually, if I don't understand something, I can't sleep. So that's kind of a problem with me. So I just keep digging, trying to look at different perspectives. So I think that's been a habit. So writing came out of that habit of asking questions, of trying to understand something more, or wonder why somebody thinks in a certain manner, why I think in a certain manner. So yeah, it's pretty much come out of that, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, lovely. So this book, like I said in my introduction, is a compilation, not in chronological order, of your writings. And you've curated them under 5 different sections. And allow me just a moment to introduce it to everybody.
Okay,
here.
sure.
Yeah, so the sections are Art and Artists, The Nation State, The Theatre of Secularism, A Savage Inequality, and In Memoriam. So sort of they've been curated under these 5 sections. But for somebody, Krishna, who enjoys the world of improvisation so much, and I remember many years ago in an interview that I did with you, you talked about how you don't even like plan or prepare, both in terms of the structure or the content of your concert. You just go and sit down and then sing.
Mm-hmm.
So for somebody like that, was this process of sitting down and curating it, was it tough, and how was that process like, really?
So I'm going to give most of the credit to Manasi, who's my editor, and completely to her as far as curation goes. I mean, yeah, initially when they came to me, they basically said, can we, bring together pieces that you've written and find a way of bringing them, like in one publication. So the first effort was to, to select pieces that in a way are not specific to its time context, because there are some pieces that you write pretty much at that moment, right? Something has happened, and it is too specific to an incident that it doesn't have a larger thought process to it. So I kind of put those pieces out out of reckoning immediately. So it were pieces that were triggered by a happening or just some intellection or some feeling, and that I felt still has resonance. In the larger spectrum, you could read it today, and you could find something in your own life with it. So that was the first principle, so to speak, in selection. Yeah. Then bringing them into themes, I think was for me, it was interesting to put it actually into themes, because like you said in the introduction, these pieces, you just write them, right? You write them not thinking of a publication. You're writing it in a certain context.
Yeah.
And you don't think of them as a flow of your own thought processes or changes. You don't look at it in that manner at all. So one great thing I think that happened through this book was that I was able to look through what I've written in a kind of idea of changes in thought processes. Like, I would read a piece and I would think there's something missing here, and then there's the next piece and read that and I see that missing piece of the puzzle is there. So that was nice to see that there was this conversation between pieces. I think that what's happens with most writers, that there's a conversation happening between the pieces. In a sense, you become irrelevant, which is what actually I like about writing, that after a while actually you're irrelevant in that sense. So the pieces debate themselves. I think, for example, consistency, is the most overrated idea. So it is great that the pieces are not consistent, which means that I am still alive and thinking, which is what I like to be. So it was great to see that, and it's also when you select pieces, it's also true when you become any columnist will confess, if they want to be honest, that being a regular columnist sometimes is a pain. The fact is, every 2 weeks you send in a piece. You may have nothing to say.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have nothing to say, but you just have to say something. So I think the first pieces I threw out are the pieces which I knew were basically churned out ones. Second was to say, can we look at pieces that have a larger conversation in them? And then bringing them to these frames, which actually Manasi put the frames together, was lovely for me in a way, right? So because there was a thread
Yeah. That.
in it, and there were also questions in it. So it was a fascinating read for me too, because I read every one again.
Yeah.
I read all of them again. I looked at them again. Some of them made little tweaks here and there because some were written at a time when, say, certain laws were not in place. So we had to kind of make those little
Right.
changes.
Right. I was also thinking that in the case of a concert, in a certain way, you're the boss, right? And we, the audience, sit back and we like take what you give us. And of course, we choose to respond to it differently. But then you are in a certain way, like you're curating it, and we are sort of, you're leading us along the way. But in
Yeah.
a certain way, in reading a book, Krishna, like the audience becomes the boss. I felt like the reader was the boss, right? The reader has the luxury, especially because of the nature of this book, to engage with the book differently. Like I have like severe OCD, so I read the book like without like.
That's good. Good.
But it's possible also for people to read one chapter here and another chapter from.
Yeah.
How would you want your reader to engage with this book? That's what I'm curious about.
That's an interesting question. When I wrote Southern music, I had actually given a guide on how the reader could
I
read the
remember that.
book in the first page. I think this is the kind of book that you can pick anywhere. You can just pick any piece if you want to and read, or any section. So I mean, they do stand independently as pieces. They will, but I think what would make sense is at least look at sections together. Because I think there is something interesting happening between the pieces, and like you said, they're not chronological, and which is also interesting because it's possible sometimes that a piece that I wrote before is in a way, if, for a lack of a different word, slightly more nuanced than a piece I wrote later. It's possible. That also brings an interesting thought of saying, what happened here, right? For me as a writer, but as a reader, I think they are also placed in a manner that allows you to flow through them. So I would say if you can read a section together, that'll be great. Also, comparing it to a concert, in a way, this is also like how I believe a concert should be as a musician, not as a listener. Where, in the sense, I don't believe in the form of regulation. Of being the way you should perform. So you could be that kind of a reader and say, I don't believe in reading regulations, so let me just pick what I want. So I guess it'll work both ways. It'll work both ways. I mean, but I think, shall we say, sections together make sense to me.
Okay, so I think I was a good reader. I heard the
Okay,
word.
good.
Okay, I want to ask you something. Like when we look at our photographs from the past, we sometimes shudder at how we looked, the way we dressed, and in a certain way, our aesthetics are constantly evolving, right? And while revisiting your old articles, because this also has pieces from 2011, 12,
Yeah, around 10 and 11, I think. From 10 and 11,
11,
approximately. I don't remember.
Um,
Yeah.
did you feel, TM, that your style, form, aesthetics, your ideology of inquiry, or the way you sort of went about this process of inquiry had undergone a shift? And I also want to ask you whether this is similar to the idea of music. Like when you listen to your music from the past, do you feel that this is a voice that has consolidated way more experiences, and therefore there is a sense of, of a maturity, of a sense of evolution, which is, so I want to ask you whether while reading through, you felt that.
Well, I think there's no doubt that, any kind of intellection, I don't separate emotion from it, whether it's music or whether it is writing or anything, right? I think they all are, go through a process of greater nuance, especially when they are difficult questions. When I say difficult, I mean in terms of being self-questioning, in terms of challenging all notions that you believe in or your close society believes in or larger politics believe in. And I think that many times when you're younger, you start with what you could call a less sense of the gray. I won't say no gray, I'll say less sense of the gray.
Right.
And I think through a period of time, you may not still agree with the gray, that some parts of the gray, but you kind of find a language for yourself to, shall we say, converse with that.
Sure.
I think that's the difference that really happens. You could still believe in something you believed 15 years ago. But 15 years ago, you may not be able to have a conversation with somebody who has a position that's not very close to you, and also in the in-betweens. You may not have the language for it, right? But I think through a period of time, you also develop a language on how do you do it. And I think it's very personal. Everybody has to develop their language for themselves. That comes from introspection, comes from reading, comes from listening, a lot of listening, if I may add. And I think that helps. I think that's probably, if you ask me if there's a change, I can see I have the language in the way I write that's different from the language 15 years ago. So at that time, you may understand the in-betweens, but you would not know how to address that in-between. Because there's also that fear, I think, sometimes that by addressing it, are you in a way moving away from your perception or what you want to say, which is not necessarily true. You can find a way of dialogue. So I think, dialogue is something that takes time. It needs to be nurtured, even yourself. Forget about other people. Yeah. And that changes the way you write. It changes the way you speak. And that's true of music. It's no different.
No different. Yeah.
I mean, if you take any musician and listen to their music when they're young and old, the obvious thing they'll say is, no, at that time they were younger and they sang with more energy. But that's not it, actually. Mm-hmm. What actually is happening is their language of music is changing. And what they're able to do as they grow older is they're able to address the in-betweens and the grays in their own music. Forget about other people.
Yeah.
So when they start finding a language to let the grays play out, then the music kind of changes. So that's the maturity. The maturity is not in, people think it's age. It's not age. You can be absolutely immature at 75. We have many people like that around us, so we know. It's not age at all. It's the ability to actually find that musical language for yourself. So you let certain things play out. Maybe in music, something that aids and hopefully aids that is the change of physicality. Because you're not in body the same person you are. It's true of tennis, isn't it? It's true of cricket. It's true of anything. So when your body or your voice is not the same, then there is a pause that happens. And that pause allows you, if you so seek, to address that in between in the art. And I think that way it's similar in that sense.
Yeah. I love the idea of the in-betweens. That's a beautiful term. So I want also to say that, while I read this, I couldn't help but noticing this, obviously this constant questioning, right, that runs through the entire book itself. But I also loved how sometimes it's also about chiding and sometimes, admitting and confessing your own, the mistakes that you've made. I particularly like this one story that you shared, TM, about this conversation with your driver when you were about 10 years old, and you talked about how you wish you could undo that, right? And you could go back and talk to him. And I want to ask you, and I've asked you this before as well, about this whole process of laying bare, and this vulnerability. Why is vulnerability? You talked about why it's crucial in the context of art. I also want to ask you, why is it crucial in the process of writing?
I mean, I think it's a crucial process in being a human being to a large extent. See, we all live our lives with the centrality of ourselves, especially if we come from any kind of privilege. It could be sex, gender, it could be caste, it could be race, it could be color, it could be anything. And if it's a combination of few, then it's even greater, right? So the point is that the moment we think, or we suggest, or we perceive, our personal self is at the center of that process. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. It's a fact. We are at the center of the process. And the moment you're at the center of the process, the first thing the human nature is to protect that center. So what you would give to actually acknowledge something is fundamentally guarded by one, shall we say, fixed component, which is safeguard me. When I say me, I mean everything that I am, which is my identity, my cultural possessions, my social possessions, economy too, but I still think that's far less than.
Yeah.
So you're safeguarding this, and then you're having this conversation, right? So you would give, you may say, I'm open, you may say, yes, I receive, etc. But all that is negotiated with this one center, which you will never move.
Right.
Now, the question is, can we turn that on its head and say there is no center, or there's a marginal center? So take yourself out of that position, from that centrality, and then something interesting happens. And that's a scary proposition, because fundamentally you are willing to demolish everything that you are.
Yeah.
Right? And that is why we won't do it. We may not do it all the time. Even if you can do it for 2 minutes in a day, that's brilliant. I think that's a great achievement, right? So if you can do that, and when you do that, when you take yourself out of that equation in that sense, then it hits you so bloody hard. Everything hits you so hard. A reality is a different reality. Because one thing you're immediately taking away is your reaction to that reality. Absolutely. The reaction to the reality is to safeguard yourself. So if you remove the reaction to it, and you remove yourself to it, it's just hitting you.
Yeah.
And that can be quite a revealing moment, or moments. Yeah. And that's why vulnerability is very important, because only then are you debaggaged for a while. Where you can actually realize what's going around you and how you participate in it unconsciously, consciously, through habit, whatever, all that apart. Right? The second thing that you would not do is, what about him? He's as bad as me, or he's worse than me. These are our natural reactions, right? The first thing is to say, I'm not as bad. I have changed. This is all old stories. Second, to say, why you talk only about me? Why don't you talk about the other person? These are both because you're desperate to safeguard yourself.
Yeah.
If you can remove it, then I think vulnerability allows you to see life in a way that you normally cannot say, and not even see, I would say feel life. There's a difference between reading a book and feeling a book. And I think when you feel life, how it is, then I think most of the things that you hold so sacrosanct become, at least momentarily, immaterial. And the courage comes from that. People ask me, how you fearless, etc. No, the courage only comes from this possibility, that you see it in a manner that I'm fine, I'm okay.
Yeah.
And that leads to an acknowledgement that we're all damaged goods. We're all deeply damaged goods. Right? And let's not hold on to something just to validate ourselves as being this. I think that does something. I think that really does something special to us. And it can, and it can happen anywhere. But if it can happen, then I think at least the next conversation we will have with somebody may be different. The tone of our voice may be different. It's quite incredible.
Yeah, and you talked about feeling, right? I think when someone is vulnerable, I think that process of feeling also just becomes, you kind of like you don't start reading it, but you start feeling it because of that vulnerability.
Because you're willing to receive. Fundamentally, we are not species who receive.
Correct.
We do not receive. We filter. There's a huge difference between, we are filtering species. So if you say, take the filter out, then we receive. And that can do something.
Absolutely, yeah. TM, in your essay on solitude, with specific reference to Albert Camus, you talk about how Camus ensured that at the time that you were reading his essay, you write about how you remained still but troubled, right? And I'm super fascinated with those two words. And I want to ask you about, would you think as artists and writers who inhabit, do you think that they inhabit that space, which is static, dynamic, still troubled, stillness, movement? So I just want to ask you, would you think that you are almost constantly in that space, and that space is crucial?
Yeah, I mean, I don't. First thing, I don't think any great or lovely piece of writing or singing or anything, right? Anything, could be anything actually, need not be just art, comes from a unidimensional space. It can never come from you. So when we say that this person was such a pure human being, I'm telling you, if he was a pure human being, he was a lousy artist. I can say this anywhere. Only a person who is jagged really responds, because only it's in that dealing with that jagged part
Yeah.
of you, or in whatever fashion that you may so do, where something interesting happens.
Happens. Yeah.
You know, if you're whatever, you're just nothing. You've just done everything right according to what society believes. It's a very boring human being, and
Yeah.
usually
Yeah.
that person,
Absolutely.
there's no inspiration. So I think this whole idea of being still, many people think being troubled is agitated. I think they get confused. There's a difference
Yeah.
between agitation and being deeply involved, deeply immersed in a problem or in an idea. It could be a trouble,
Yeah.
right? They're very different things. Agitation creates a different set of responses, and
Yeah.
that's for a different conversation. But
Yeah.
so the stillness comes with the ability to stay, what I would say, drowned in the problem. We don't like to be drowned in a problem. And I'm using
Yeah.
problem in a kind of a loose sense, not necessarily
Yeah.
in the sense of, you know what I mean? Yeah.
Like,
So,
yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So when you're drowned in it, then there is a stillness because you're completely, it's like actually being inside a pool.
Yeah. Inside.
When you're
Yeah.
swimming and you're inside water, I mean, you're holding your breath, right? You need to survive,
Yeah.
but you're still. Now, you could think of that as a contradiction because you technically have to hold your breath and be conscious of that, otherwise, you're going to drown.
Right.
But you're absolutely still because you're just looking around in water. It's like scuba diving or snorkeling.
Yeah.
So there are two. What perceives as a contradiction is actually a reality, and that's what I mean. And I think that space is precious because when you breathe from that, that's when something comes out.
Yeah.
Now it's not about this right, wrong, etc. You know, and we also, I think, give too much importance to prettiness of what comes out. Whether it is in writing or whether it is in dance or music, the prettiness of it. We are so obsessed with pretty writing, with pretty singing. And I can tell you, all of these are half the time very ugly pieces of art, including writing. I've read some very pretty verses which are so shallow that I would throw that book into the dustbin. Right? It's not difficult to write or sing pretty. It's very difficult to write or sing or dance honestly. And I think what that allows you to do is honesty. And what you already spoke about is vulnerability.
Yeah.
That you have to bear yourself open. You just have to have that ability to just be absolutely open. I think that's where it lies.
Yeah. Beautiful. TM, I wanted to ask you to read excerpts from the book, but I'm not going to compel you, so we can skip that. It's okay. But I want to ask you a little bit about, one of the chapters. You talk about technology, and you talk about you say that technology is a you say that the notion that technology is a non-discriminative mechanism is untrue. Until that creates beauty in and around. Okay, so that's what you talk about technology. I want to ask you a little bit about, in today's context, especially when the world has really moved, gone digital, I often think about how those who are good at their art but don't have access to technology versus those who have access to technology but perhaps have a long way to go in terms of their craft are probably making it. So I want to ask you a little bit, if you could talk about the discriminative nature of technology itself.
Yeah, I mean, we always think technology solves everything. Give everybody an Aadhaar card number and corruption is gone out of the country. I mean, that's bogus nonsense, right? The corrupt are going to be corrupt because they'll find a way. I can tell you how they also circumvent the Aadhaar card. I mean, it's not very easy, not difficult to do. Go ask anybody who goes to a ration shop and they'll tell you how it is done. They will put in their Aadhaar number and they'll be told they're given so much of sugar, but that sugar is not given. Now, therefore, technology has really not helped in making the guy less corrupt, has it? No. So the problem is we think that the solution is in plugging something, right? But the solution is actually in society. The solution has to be in the way we live. Now, the digital platform is just a platform that reflects society. It's not going to reflect something that's different from what you and I are. So by thinking that, just because everybody has a smartphone, we are all equal. It's just I mean, it's it's so bizarrely nonsensical. I don't even believe how people even say it sometimes, you know.
Yeah.
The fact is,
Yeah.
yeah, sorry.
Unifying experience,
I
right?
know. I don't even get it where they're coming up with this kind of thing. Just look at who's having this conversation, you and me. I mean, just let's be very clear about it, right? So, yeah, exactly. Just think of it, right? The irony is kind of crazy. But the fact is that the entire universe of the digital platform is curated by the people offline who believe in a certain social structure. I'm using generalizations, but
Yeah.
just for discussion.
Sure. Yeah.
So therefore, you replicate this online. So when people say online is, you have Facebook. I mean, they're all clubs. Those are the clubs that are there offline. They're not new clubs. Your
Yeah.
WhatsApp groups are the same groups you would have offline. You just have more members because they are spread out of the world, but they're all the same kind of people. I mean, it's not like because you're online, you're having friendships with people completely different social, social context as you. It's not going to happen. That's only going to happen if you move from your house and actually travel to places and meet people and talk to them and laugh with them, right?
Yeah.
I
Exactly.
mean,
Yeah.
so keeping that in context, especially in the pandemic, it has been so blatantly seen.
Yeah.
One is within, say, even the privileged art forms, where everybody, some people just don't have the ability to do things online. And I know those are the people who are unable to take classes, extremely talented people.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they don't know to network, right? But you have absolutely mediocre artists who just know how to network. And I can say this bluntly, and I'm not going to, say anything less. But, they're the ones, fine. I mean, they're the ones who are able to access the market, so to speak.
Right.
This is one sector. Now, what about the art forms that don't even are not part of this market,
Right.
So the fact is, who has an online market? Let's, in general senses, exceptions kept aside. It's the privileged who have an online market. So T M Krishna has an audience in the United States of America, right? A Nayandi Melam artist sitting near Tirunelveli does not have a market in New York City. Does not have a market in Chennai City. Why New York City? Now, his market lies within the geographical region of his territory. Now, for them, the experience is direct, not through a mobile phone. He may have a Facebook page, he may put clippings of him playing, but that's not going to change this fact.
Yeah.
It doesn't replace it. People don't get that. It doesn't replace it.
Yeah.
Whereas I can take advantage of the Facebook platform of mine and monetize it and expand my empire, which the other individual cannot. Why? Because the two art forms and the individuals fundamentally in society have been placed at different places.
Okay.
He is placed at the margins. I am placed at the cultural privileged state.
Yeah.
Now, when that is not addressed, how is this going to change? Now, if this is addressed, let's presume by affirmative action of some sort, we address this disparity. Now we are talking, because then the technology will also be used to expand his sense of presence and his identity and his culture. Now, without addressing this, that cannot happen.
Yeah.
Exceptions will be there. But the worst thing we can do is take the exceptions to be the norm. They are not the norm. I know they're not the norm, especially in the last 2 years, because I've worked in this area with friends. They're not, they're so difficult. Technology doesn't solve anything. You need people with heart realizing that technology doesn't solve it. And we need to find solutions that address this. So technology has to work with an understanding that it is unequal, not with an understanding that it is equalizing.
Yeah. That's like a leveler, right? Which it's not.
Yeah, we have to shift that perception. We shift it, then we maybe have something interesting happening. And then we will realize we need to do that physically too. Because behavior does not just change online, which is why I think people think, social media has made people more violent. I don't think so. You're just hearing it outside more often than you did. That's all I think.
Yeah.
I don't think that social media is an evil. I just think it's allowed to amplify things that were whispers before. That's all I think.
Absolutely. Yeah, you said it. I also want to ask you a question on one of my favorite topics, which is the Guru Sishya Parampara. And I do know that the disciple Chaitanya Tamani's film also addressed some aspects of this. In your essay on the Guru Sishya Parampara, TM, you say the problem with our concretized version is that this promise of magic is used as an exercise to normalize inequality. In other fields, you say, teachers and students have drifted apart, even vehemently disagreeing with one another, each finding their own areas of influence. But in the Guru Sishya Parampara, music and dance especially, rarely can a Sishya stand up against his or her Guru and hope to survive another day.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
more recently, TM, I actually also watched a production where the idea of a vice was told. The story of arrogance was depicted by a Guru Sishya story, and it was about how a Sishya knows a little more than the Guru, and that was arrogant. Now, I want to ask
Okay.
you, it's possible, right, that the Sishya could know more? Like at some point,
Yeah,
the
of
Sishya
course.
would know more.
It's of course possible, but no guru, including me, will publicly accept it, will we? I may say it. I may say it to my own mind quietly, but you can't. That's the ego of an artist. Humility and artists are two words that don't go together. With all people may believe, no, people of lot of egos, writers, all of us, because we believe that, we always believe figured out something. And so, yeah, I mean, I think fundamentally the teacher and the student is an unequal relationship. Let's first start with that fundamental premise. Whether it is Carnatic music, whether it's the college or anywhere, it is an unequal relationship. So the question we are asking is, how much is the system going to begin from that acknowledgement? So we start asking that question. So the moment I speak about Guru Shishya, everybody says, oh, I had such good experience with my Guru. My Guru loved me so much. So the first thing we have to take away is your lovely relationship with the Guru. I mean, I had a lovely relationship with my Guru. But that doesn't mean the relationship, that doesn't mean that the structure was right. Doesn't mean that. So I think we have to first take that away, because the moment we think in that frame, we can't engage in this conversation. So I say in that piece too, take your personal experiences away from this, right?
Okay.
And the other thing is, there are few rotten apples and you can't make a sweeping statement about the entire Guru Shishya Parampara. So the question is this: first, what is it that we find so precious in it? Can we actually dispassionately ask that question? What is so precious? Take the name of your Guru away, take yourself away, and tell me what is it. All the things that we will point at. You will talk about this unlimited sharing. You will talk about how much you learned from those moments of intensity. You will talk about how when nothing was said, so much was said. I know all that.
Intangibles. Yeah.
And more of the mumbo jumbo too, because I've experienced it and I probably dish it out too. So I know both. So, but this is actually, I mean, if you take them all seriously, there is a great relationship and there is an intense bond. All this has got nothing to do with the unequality, has it? It's got to do with the fact that your Guru and your Guru especially, was a good human being. Now, a system cannot depend on the goodness of the individuals in the system. The system has to be such that takes care that it provides an environment for goodness. Two very different things.
Right.
Right? Even the nicest person, who, if he has an environment that allows him to, shall we say, oppress, the tendency is to do it in whatever minor manner. Right? It could be gaslighting. I mean, how many gurus do gaslighting? Why don't we even talk about that? Gaslighting, in fact, is part of the system, by the way. We believe gaslighting is a way to make the person better.
Yeah, it's okay, right? It's okay to be.
It's okay. No, it's supposed to improve the person.
Yeah.
Right? So, I mean, we are living in 2021. Let's not go back to 2,000 years ago. Okay, nobody was there. We don't know. And I'm not interested actually in that conversation. I'm interested in the conversation today. So sexual harassment is, of course, the worst of it, right? But there are many other things that happen in between which also need to be addressed.
Right.
Right? So if we take that out, then you know that the system is not a caring system. It's not a system that's going to hold your hand. We need a system that is caring to the student because of the inequality which is inherent. That's what we are addressing. And the Guru Shishya Parampara is no great special cultural identifier of this land. No way. I can find you the same sensibilities and the same ideas of learning across the globe, from Japan to South America, everywhere. And And by the way, there is more to the world than the United States and Europe. Let's remember that too. Right?
Yeah,
Won't you say
absolutely.
outside everybody's thinking what's happened in America or England or in Germany? No, I'm talking about South America. I'm talking about Japan. I'm talking
Yeah, yeah.
so many other parts of the world. So there are ways people have learned in that openness. So that my point is, can we create a system that allows for that openness, that allows for addressing the inequality? That's what
Right.
we're asking here,
We need
right?
to, yeah,
And I
yeah.
don't think we have one. I don't think. I mean, I have changed as a teacher. I know I have changed as a teacher. So you know that we can't depend on the goodness of the heart of individuals. We have to depend. We have to create a structure that enables goodness. That's what we say.
I mean, that's fantastic. So I want to ask you a little bit about the mainstream and the marginalized, the main and the other, the intellectual club, as you call it. Over the years, TM, you have consciously engaged with this idea. And what are some of the significant shifts that you have seen in the way that things are becoming more inclusive and less discriminative? Is that happening at all? Like
Well, you're talking about in general, in
in
society in
general,
general.
like your observations in the world of the arts? Yeah.
So, I mean, what I can say, if you ask me for positives, I think one thing that is very clear, at least in the last decade plus, is that now discrimination is a conversation out there in the open that nobody can run away from, which I think it's by itself is a great step forward.
It's a great step,
It's not. It was not true. You know, when I wrote Southern Music in 2013, it was published. I don't think at least the elite art forms in India really addressed it in public. They may be in academic pieces and that kind of work, but
yeah.
but the practitioners across this country, especially of the elite art forms, never spoke about inherent discrimination within their art forms. It was not something that was part of public conversation.
Yeah.
That has changed for sure.
Sure.
And I think there's also been a greater assertion coming from artists who have been marginalized and marginalized art forms and marginal communities, greater contestation and assertion that you see, which is great
Yeah.
because that's the only way you
Yeah.
can disturb status quo.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're right. You need that push back and saying, you guys need to shut up for a while.
Yeah.
That's very important. I think both these have contributed to a large extent to a very vibrant discourse, which is great. I don't believe my generation of artists are really going to change. I'm not being pessimistic. I'm being realistic. They may say the right things for public posture, but we can all read through it when we read an interview. We don't need there's no need for rocket science to figure it out. But I think the change is really happening in the coming generations. I really think it is, and I'd like to, in the conversations I've had, in the kind of across the spectrum, from Parai artists to Carnatic artists to Hindustani artists to everywhere, and I think that the change there is an active engagement in different ways with these issues. The fact that we need to speak, especially in India, caste is a very big issue that we need to talk about. Caste curating notions of beauty, caste curating notions of sophistication, of what is culture, what is uncultured, all these words that we, throw out. And we say it's preference is actually just caste habit. That's all it is. It's caste habit, to put it very simply. And it's also possible a lot of people are unaware of it. I mean, that's also very much a reality. I think the next generation is different. And I think they're willing to engage with this, willing to collaborate, willing to listen to people from different cultures, trying to understand it. So I think that these are all positives. It's going to take decades till we get somewhere, unfortunately, because this takes a long time. But I think things like the Black Lives Movement has played a role, a very positive role, because I think it allowed, for Indians especially, Black Lives Movement allowed for caste to be brought into the equation of discussion. And that allowed for people seeing the resonance between the two, that they're not very different. And this is something people have been saying for ages, but it allowed younger people to actually come face to face with it. So those are the positives. And I think there are certain little nuances that are happening in the performing world, in experimentation, and they all need not be right and politically correct every time. That's what I always think, they don't need to, tick all the boxes of being aware. But it's okay if they're going to make mistakes. They won't be called out. The one thing I want to tell the world of the performing artists from the privileged section is you being called out is a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It's like in feminism, a man being called out for trying to speak for a woman is a good thing. And men do it often because we are feminists, right? So similarly, for upper caste people to be called out, say if they do a piece of art which is appropriating something, which is problematic, if you're called out, do not go into defense of what you've done because you don't understand where the other person is coming from. Just listen. You may not still agree, that's okay, but just listen. So I'd say experiment, and if you're called out, that's okay. It's fine to be called out. I don't know why people, with social media, people get very antsy about it, that it's disgrace. No, it isn't. You're just being told that maybe something you did was not sensitive. Fine. Live with it. Listen to. You don't need to respond on social media. Go and do some reading. Try to understand it. And if you can engage with the person who called you out, engage with the person. If you cannot, then do it on yourself. But I think that's the only thing I want to tell young people who want to engage in it. You will not get it right every time. Be sure of it. You will not get it right all your life because you've never had lived experience. And that's the point. I will never get it right to understand what a woman or a trans person goes through or an LGBTQ person goes through. I may have the politics right, but I'll never get it because I have never experienced it. So you have to live with that possibility that you get something wrong. That's very interesting space to be in because you will always learn there.
It's beautiful. Yeah. Thank you so much. TM, I just want to also ask you, in one of your essays, you talk about, I think it's an essay called I'm Upper Caste and I'm Proud of It, that appeared in Scroll. And you speak of charity and how the hand of the giver is stronger than the receiver, and how the receiver remains forever beholden to the charitable. Now, I want to ask you a little bit about, a whole bunch of, through the pandemic, a whole bunch of organizations, trusts, including yours, have been doing some phenomenal work in helping artists who've been marginalized. But would you think of this also as a thing of the privileged giving the marginalized? I mean, I'm just like trying to.
So the fact of the matter is, how much ever I try to change the vocabulary and how much ever I try to say what I want, it is still a space where there is inequality. So we don't use the word giving, we say sharing. We try to have conversations. We have tried to put, but the fact is, it is still not. I can't say we're above this disparity. We're not above. You're not above this disparity. Yeah. When I call and speak to a marginalized artist, the tonality of my voice and the tonality of his or her voice is different.
Yeah.
How am I going to address it? So when somebody calls me and says, Mr. Krishna, I'm so thankful to you, I'm trying to say, don't thank me. You just got the money that was supposed to come to you. Now, I may say all that, but the reality is what? I may say all that, but the reality is the person feels beholden to me. So that's a quandary. That's an unresolved quandary. How do I resolve it? Right? I can't resolve it in that moment. I'll have to push it aside, tell the person. But whatever is said and done, the person feels emboldened to distrust a group of upper caste people in distrust. Who is this famous musician who's doing all this help for all these rural. I mean, that whole narrative. How much ever I push it aside, that's a narrative that keeps hitting you on your face. So, I mean, what is the answer to it is a larger answer. The answer is not in that moment. The answer is, can we engage in a continuous way by which this kind of moves, this disparity which is so acute, kind of, can you bring it to what I like to think is that we get to a point where the engagement is taught, right? And there are pulls and pushes on all sides. So there is no calm equality, but there is an uncomfortable equality where there is always a pull and a push and learning that is happening. But when we will get there, I don't know, we may get it partially, we may not get for certain communities. There's so many things that go into it. But until then, this is something that anybody who engages in the social sphere and coming from privilege has to struggle with. You have to be aware that irrespective of how much of your politics seems all open and empathy, etc., there is this reality that's going to hit you. So if you can work out ways by which you will constantly realize it, change the way you engage with people in the margins, change your language, talk less, listen. When you say share space, what do we mean? There's a difference between sharing space and giving opportunity. Which of the two are we doing? So so all this it's a struggle. I mean, it's a struggle, and I don't believe I have the answers for them. But I think that I am always aware that this is a very problematic space. So, which is why I think when people write checks, it's no big deal. I am not overtly, greatly thankful to any donor. Let me say that bluntly. I don't care if you wrote a check of 1 lakh or 15 lakhs. I don't care. Because I think that if you could give that money was not for you. The money was, which means it's extra money. That's what it means. If you can write a check for 10 lakhs, it's extra money, damn it. Right? You're not reducing your comforts in life. You could still give 10 lakhs, means it's fine. So I'm not overtly thankful. I'm thankful that you at least realize that money belongs to people who don't have it. And them not having it is not their fault. In most cases, that's the tragedy of this whole thing, right? It's not their fault. It is caste, it's society, it's marginalization, it's everything bundled that has kept them where they are for decades and centuries. So, which is why I think these issues are not economic issues, they're cultural issues. So, we need to, I think, underplay check givers. I know people are uncomfortable when I say it, and they say, what do you mean? And I'm going to say that out. That I underplay donors. And I think the people at least who have contributed to our campaign understand why. There's another thing that I have to say this out, is I hate these people who put out pictures.
Publicize?
Who put pictures of money being given, of provisions being given to people. It's the most vulgar way of finding any publicity. And the excuse given is that inspires others to give. Very sorry. There are different ways you can inspire other people to give. The worst thing is you can put those individuals in such a sad situation where they can't say no to. They may even think it is normal. You may come and say, but they don't mind. Of course they don't mind. They are on the margins. They have no choice in the matter. How will they have a choice to say no to you when you're giving a check for 5,000 rupees? No. So I found it absolutely disgusting that people have been putting photographs. They put their banners behind it. In sometimes it's actually been, I think it's been gross, vulgar, a violation of basic dignity of those individuals.
Absolutely. I mean, the best thing about having a conversation with you, Krishna, is like, what is in your mind, and you don't have the courage to say it. You have the courage to say it. I can simply just nod my head. So
you can send me a few notes. I'll put out a few things too.
So yeah, I was just thinking that when you talked about this uncomfortable space, right? I thought of the word again, still troubled, right? It's a still troubled kind of space that we are in. Yeah. Also, TM, when in one of the essays you talk a lot about words and words that are problematic, and I was just thinking about the word marginalized, right? I mean, when we keep using it, do you sometimes think that we are reinforcing that they are the other? I don't know. I'm just thinking aloud, and I maybe.
So, yeah, I see, but there's always the problem with these kind of words, right? The question is also, I think, if somebody has a problem with the words, if the community comes and says, "Don't call us marginalized," then we stop.
Right. Okay.
The answer comes from there.
Okay.
Okay. So if the community says, "Look," but the fact is that these are people pushed to the margin. You can use different descriptive terms if you want. There have been different terms used through history also, for example, right? Like the government used to, during the British times, they used to call it depressed classes, for example. There was a term called depressed classes. So you have different terms used. So I think what the word marginalized does, when the discourse is between people of privilege, is very different if you're using that word in a conversation with a person from that. I think it also, the placement of that word also matters, right? So if you and I are having the conversation, the word marginalized reinforces the fact that you and I are privileged.
Yeah. Okay.
Right?
That's a big point.
Now, if I had a conversation with a person who has been pushed to the margins, and I reiterate to her or him that they are marginalized, that's way offline. I don't dare do that.
Oh, no.
Right? So I think that also matters. So I think when the conversation is among the privileged, I think that word allows for at least a pause and saying, so what am I then? You know, what kind of privileges do I have? Or so it kind of disturbs. So it also depends on the context of where it's used, who is using it, very important. And if there is a pushback from a community saying that I don't want to call us, let's call us X, and then we just call them X, whatever that is. That's the way you respond to it. It's their right to decide what expression to use. Absolutely.
Absolutely. I just have just a couple of more questions. I know.
Sure, go ahead. No problem. Don't worry.
10 minutes more.
I have time for my beer.
So in your essay, okay. In your essay that appeared in the print, TM, you talked about, the essay was called Parayan, Porambok and Devadasi, and the dark casteist history of these common words. You speak about how K.V. Narayan Swami replaced the word Parayan with Ezhai. Recently, I had a conversation with this really young folk artist called Shilpa Mudbi, and she talked to me about, who engages a lot with the folk community and culture and stuff. She talked to me about how to keep the folk culture alive. She said the best way is to sort of make it your own. She said insert yourself into the narrative and give it the respect that it needs and contextualize it so that it continues. Now, I want to ask you, do you think that this insertion, contextualization, this contemporarization, is that crucial or important, especially in the world of classical, where some of the content, some of the words may not necessarily we are not able to respond to it in the way that it was probably envisaged at a certain time?
So I think there are two parts to it, right? I may have see, if you're talking about an art form that belongs to a community that is not visible, let's put it that way, I'm not entirely comfortable with people of privilege taking over that art form and performing it constantly. I'm not very comfortable with that. Because I am far more comfortable if you engage in a collaboration. It's a complicated collaboration, not simple, it's messy, or provide spaces for the visibility of that culture and the art form. I'll tell you why. Because the community is already vulnerable. Their culture is already vulnerable. Now, if, say, you, for example, Akila, start performing an art form from a community that's vulnerable, okay? You learn the art from them. You can acknowledge it 100 times on the stage. I don't care. You can say 100 times on the stage that, they are the ones who gave it. Yeah. But ultimately what happens is, you take that art form, you may become center stage with that art form, you propagate that art form within your own community. What happens to them? That's exactly what happened with Bharatanatyam, right? What else happened? So I'm a little uncomfortable with it. I think we need two different treatments for art forms that have socio-cultural privilege and art forms that don't have. Art forms that don't have, I believe, we need to find a way you energize the community and energize the power within the cultures to push. What can we be? We are enablers of that. Can we enable that? That's the question. In art forms that come from privilege, I think we're saying, can we break down the superstructures and say, boss, come back to reality. You live on terra firma. So I think there are two different techniques that are needed to address that. Now, but your other question on words, for example, the song was, I think, is Vargalamoya. Yeah, I mean,
correct.
So there's an interesting debate with that song specifically, which I write about, right? So I would rather call it the P word. I think we should start saying the P word like we say the N word. That's also something I would like to put out. I say the P word in that piece, in fact. Now the P word is used by Krishna Bharati at a certain time context. But we know that in today's world, you don't use that word. That word is a derogatory term that is not used. Fine. Yeah. So what do you do, right? So what KVN does is he substitutes it with Ezhai. But there is an interesting twist to it. There is another word which is Pulayan, which is not very far from this P word, which is used. And nobody seems to have a problem with that word. That also needs some investigation, by the way. But now the second problem that happens with Ezhai is a musical problem. Is that as per the poetic structure that is required in that line, Ezhai doesn't take that. So now there was somebody who actually wrote to me and said, who are you to change the word that Krishna Bharati wrote and make it politically correct today. Now, that's the other debate, right? But the fact is, we are living with these art forms today. We're not living with them 150 years ago, which means they
Definitely.
need
Yeah.
rethinking, they need rethought, they need revisiting, right? And unlike painting or sculpture, where the sculpture is just what it is, which was done 60 years ago, music keeps moving and changing, which allows us to re-look at things that, including lyrics, from a different context. So it's a fine line. I know, it's a fine line between, shall we say, um, making a mess of somebody else's piece of art and also recognizing the politics of today or the consciousness of today. But I think
Yeah.
we need to look at both very carefully. So I don't use the word p word at all in that song. I changed yere also because I found another word that
Yeah. You
ticks
told.
also the poetic requirements. So I use a different word.
Right.
So we have to there has to be some thinking about it, definitely.
Yeah. Um, I just want to ask you a little bit about your writing process. I know that you have another book on the national anthem that is around the corner, like soon to be
Well, I'm
released.
supposed to be writing it as I speak to you. I've not written anything, but I would write it in the next month or so. I've been actually last 2 months. I've just been reading. Actually, I've been just reading a lot, tons of it. So the book, which hopefully will come out by the end of the year, is actually a collection of 5 essays on 5 symbols of India, and these symbols were established, shall we say, independent India, to be more specific. So I've looked at the anthem, the motto, the emblem, the flag, and the preamble of the Constitution as 5 ideas of India enshrined in our Constitution. And there's a lot written on the historicity of these ideas and the cases, judgments, etc. But I'm trying to see if I can write an essays on what's the spirit of them. Also look at them critically. They're not perfect items. So
Yeah.
look at them critically and
Yeah.
look at them in a way that we can kind of revisit them from our minds and our thoughts today. So hopefully that book should
Right.
be out through the end of the year, and then I'm going to pause writing for a while. I've been writing a bit too much, so take a little break before
Lovely.
I get into anything else.
But your thing of reading for a month just sounds utterly delicious. I mean, I also want to really like drop everything and just read for a whole month. That sounds like
Yeah, I've
absolutely
actually done
amazing.
it for about 2 months now. I've been just reading and just pausing and reading and pausing. So yeah, it's been
Yeah.
hectic, that kind of work. So I usually write fast. I take a long time to start writing, but I usually write fast.
When you write.
So yeah, so my fingers crossed.
Yeah. TM, I just have one last question to ask you, and
Sure.
it would be a bit unfair if I didn't ask you about this on the ALA platform, which primarily we engage with and, with dance and dancers. So I want to ask you a little bit about, you've also like collaborated with dancers in the past. And
Yeah.
I just want to ask you that considering the interconnectedness of dance and music, do you think that dancers and musicians engage and interact with each other as much as they should or they could?
Well, they don't, simply put. They don't engage. I think, keeping aside what I would call, would you say that, lockdown online collaborations, keeping them aside, which I think is
Yeah.
what's pushed people to do things like that. I don't really believe there's
Yeah.
engagement, right? You can put out a stunt on social media, it'll all look good and pretty and everybody like it, but that doesn't mean you've engaged. The fact of the matter is that all these worlds of dance and music, each don't really understand the other. Carnatic musicians don't understand Bharatanatyam. I did not understand. You see, take my case. Okay, my guru Sitaram Sharma sir was part of the dance world, right?
Yeah.
But
Exactly.
the thing
Yeah.
that he never wanted me to do was to sing for dance. It's very interesting. He never wanted me to sing for dance. So
Wow.
yeah, I have sung with him once or twice, but he never wanted me to. The tatakadi, if I took the tatakadi in my hand, I remember he used to be furious with me. because to him
Wow.
that yeah, I mean, I remember this vividly in my head. So being this main star Carnatic musician is always considered superior than to be a
Considered
singer
like, yeah,
in Bharatanatyam, right? That's one. Two is Carnatic musicians don't understand the larger scape, or even any musician, Khayal or Carnatic or whatever they may be, understand the larger notion of creativity in say a different art form. We don't understand it, right? First of all, we delude ourselves that we are magically creating everything on stage, which is absolute bullshit. Um, I'll be happy to prove this with enough recordings if you want. Yeah, we do a lot of rearranging, yeah, but reorganizing.
yeah,
But it's not happening there. It's happening because a lot happened and it's coming together in different ways each time. And also the idea that in dance it comes together different ways in a way that you don't understand it because you don't understand the medium. You don't know what it means. You don't know the difference between
yeah,
a certain emotion in a certain way that comes out at a certain moment on day one and the day two. You don't know the difference. Now, are there
yeah,
artists who are machines? There are dancers, musicians, both who are machines, right? It's not like there are musicians who just parrot everything every day also. So why do we not talk about that? So I think there is lack of
yeah.
understanding of the spirit of each of those art forms. The similar in dancers, most dancers don't know anything about music. Zero. It's exactly the same. There's no difference. I'm just calling it out as it is because I know it is and I've met enough people to
True,
know.
totally.
Because there isn't understanding. There isn't understanding. Yes, they may learn little music or some sarigama padanisa and few, but there's no engagement with music. Just like here, there's no engagement with dance. And therefore, collaborations generally then remain very, very superficial. The very superficial. Like I said, they may be very pretty. You may love it. That's a different thing. I'm not talking about that. You can still love it. I love a lot of superficial things in life. So, so it's possible to enjoy it. But we're talking seriously
Yeah,
here? No. I think there needs to be actually, if there it's possible, we need to put out workshops where you'll have, whether it's Bharatanatyam or Kathak or Odissi or any art form or Kuthu or anything. I think we need musicians to be sitting and learning about the art form. Similarly, you need workshops for dancers where they learn about the music, not about what they will do with the music when they dance. No, I don't care about that. How does one
right.
feel a Kodi? How does one feel a Kalyani? How does a musician feel the difference in a certain interpretation of a line compared to another interpretation of a line? This has to be shared and learned. There needs to be workshops for or both the sides for any serious engagement to happen. I mean, I think I learned a lot. For example,
Engagement.
when I toured with Priyadarshini Govind,
Yeah,
where we worked together, as Alap was part of it, I remember. And I learned a lot from that experience. I learned a lot in the collaboration. I learned a
right,
lot in watching and listening. So I was
right.
lucky that I had a guru who was in Bharatanatyam. So I had some exposure in the
So,
past, in
yeah,
spite of him not wanting me to get in there. But in spite of that, I carried so much baggage. I carried a great infra dig against dancers. I thought, they were what's the big deal? What's the big deal? It's all nice. I like it. But, serious art is here, right? We have, stuff like that.
yeah,
So I think we need
right,
to change that. I mean, this cockiness comes from not knowing. So that needs to change.
right, right. I just have one thing to share, TM. There's somebody here, Sharda MC. She says years ago she was planning to sing Karuna Nidhiye Taye in Bauli Ragam as a prayer song in a function, and the management asked her to change the word Karuna Nidhiye because Srimati Jayalalitha was ruling. I have to share that story.
Oh, that's hilarious. That's really, really funny. Yeah, I can.
Yes.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
So did she sing Jayalalitha Ye or something like that? I'm just curious.
I don't know. I'll have to wait for Sharda to respond. But I thought it was a story that had to be shared here. So,
Absolutely.
anyway, yeah. So, TM, thank you so much for, for such a, I mean, definitely it's going to be tough for me to like sleep because I'm super wired right now. And I wish that we were having this conversation either over
I know.
coffee or any other beverage or beer,
Not
whatever.
coffee. Any
But
other
I'm
beverage is
glad
my
that
choice.
Yeah. Absolutely. I was just trying to be politically correct, but yeah. I told you that in your case, like, I just think and you have the courage to say it and I will just nod.
Please do.
So, but anyway, thank you to everybody who joined. This is the book. I just thought I'd share it with people here. So this is the book, and please go ahead and pick up a copy, and you can read it at, of course, section wise, but you don't have to finish it in one shot. You can read with it because books like these really, I mean, seriously, TM, I'm telling you that even though I've read them individually, like I said in my introduction, just reading it all together has been, also the thing about the state of still troubled, wanting to sort of find the courage to speak up, wanting to change, right? We sometimes think that, okay, we do not believe in this, but books like these have the possibility of making us think a little more, deliberate upon things, and actually making small changes in ways that
Yeah.
that can perhaps become larger. Yeah. So thank you for
Yeah, I mean,
writing
thanks a ton.
tirelessly. Yeah. Thank you so much to everybody who joined. Have a good night and bye-bye.
Thanks, good night. Bye. See you.
Bye.